This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Lee Warrenshaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA as we press forward through first round of NBA playoff action. So much good stuff happening on the basketball court. Competition is fierce, and it's getting a little chippy out there, man. And much like that, the same attitude and approach that those guys are on the court. The Baseline boys are doing the same thing too. We got a lot to get into. So let me go ahead and roll out the red carpet to my right-hand man, www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC, my brother from another mother, Mr. Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Holla back at me, Mr. Shaw. So what are your sentiments with regards to the NBA playoffs thus far?
I think we've seen a lot of what we would expect, really and truly. Higher seeded teams kind of getting it done for the most part, but some teams, I should say, early on have been competitive, especially last weekend with Brooklyn and Orlando still in games, or whatever the case would be. Those series seem to be normalizing a little bit. Boston has been winning ugly. That's, I guess good for them. Milwaukee just utterly destroying the Detroit Pistons, I think, as we all alluded to be what happened. I think out west as well, too, you're seeing the Rockets probably being a little bit more dominant than I would have thought they would have been in the series against Utah. But outside of that, I think everything has been pretty outstanding, but pretty status quo other than Golden State's epic 31-point loss. I mean, that's, well, not their loss, but they blew a 31-point lead against LA Clippers at home. That's just not something that you thought you'd have seen in this year's playoffs at all.
I don't know. Is it because when we talk about the Golden State Warriors, Shaw, we revel in their accomplishments, but even in this dynasty that they've created of winning championships, they are also the harbingers of some of the most astonishing and historic defeats in NBA history. Remember, they are the first team to allow an NBA Finals, a team up 3-1 in the NBA Finals, to lose the NBA Finals to LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers. We've seen for a team that has had a 73 win type season to be the first team that would dominate in such a fashion and not complete the deal. And we've also seen in the course of this year they have had the worst home losses for any team that is a top seed in the Western Conference. So I don't know if I'm necessarily surprised by the fact that this would be something that they would allow to happen. I do think that it is interesting that we don't talk enough about it, because I wonder if whether or not it's going to be something that will taint our perception about how great this basketball team could have truly been because of these circumstances, because it has to account for something.
Well, it does have to account for a little bit, but I just one of those, I have that feeling that you can't have great success without great failure. And so knowing that they've had some of these stunning losses and things within their history and that have to go on their resume as well, sets them up, to be the champions that they have also shown to be as well too. So with Golden State, it talks about their place in history and all of that. It might be the blemish. Oh yeah, that 3-1 thing and how that didn't work out. And I'm sure there's a lot of jokes, with the 3-1, and they blew a 31-point lead against the Clippers. So the synergy there, I think, is probably too great to ignore. But at the end of the day, they're in no danger of really losing this series against the Clippers. And, we'll see how the rest of the playoffs go on without DeMarcus Cousins as well, too, which is a big loss for them. But overall, I think Golden State's still in pretty good shape. But I do hear your point about them being involved in some things that, as a historic team, like the Bulls didn't really have these situations going along, with them, you know what I mean? So I don't know if it necessarily brings them down a notch. Well, no, I think it does bring them down a notch, but I don't think it hurts their place in overall history.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not, and again, I don't want to make that comparison to them and the Bulls. I think it's safe to say, given that the Warriors lost that 3-1 lead, right? Because if you're talking about the Chicago Bulls did not lose opportunities to win NBA championships when they made it during the Jordan era. So that already in itself disqualifies the Golden State Warriors when we try to make these comparisons of great dynasties and things of that nature. But what I guess I am saying is that, does it hurt our reflection about what? Because let's remember as well too, Shaw, that this is a different era of NBA basketball being played. Much has been said about not just the physicality that has lessened in this era of NBA basketball because of the fact that we want more offense, but also about the mentality and the strategic approach that's being used for these guys to qualify and play, in the playoffs and also playing in the finals. The level of importance. So I guess part of that, I think also when we see these type of things take place, it kind of raises the level about the seriousness by which a lot of these guys take these type of defeats. I mean, should it be or shouldn't it be a blemish on their resume, so to speak? And I do wonder sometimes that if you're the Golden State Warriors and you've been doing this now for for 5 years straight of participating in the NBA Finals, I'll give you a mulligan every now and again. But I think as this starts to matriculate and accumulate, you have to start doing like we all do, as all analysts and pundits do. You have to start questioning about, the mental fiber that these guys carry consistently through any run that they're making and apply it to the other dynasties and how they approached, not just the season, but the complete run for them to win these championships.
Well, and again, I think those are valid points when it comes to Golden State because their mental resolve, whether or not they're even going to stay as a team, as a dominant franchise past the season, all that remains to be seen. And I think those are some major questions that we'll be able to answer come June after this postseason run is over, whenever it actually ends for them. But the key components of a dynasty is being able to compete at the highest level for multiple years, which they have checked a good part of that box, I think, off already. But the other part of it is, can you keep your team together? And that is a big question mark going into this summer.
Definitely, man. So final thought before we get into the gist of our show here, which again, great show slated as, Shaw and I, we continue our series and rolling out the autopsy reports. We got two teams that we are really excited to talk about. Not that we wouldn't be, that they would be excited for us to be talking about them. I'm sure they wish they would be participating in the postseason. But what do we make so far, Shaw, of the dilemma or the circumstance with regards to Blake Griffin and the Detroit Pistons? I often say to myself that, you knew what you were getting with regards to Blake Griffin. And if you're the Detroit Pistons, I do think that he helps elevate this franchise a lot further than where they have been in years past. But I do think that there becomes a point where you have to be realistic about the expectations and their level of competition and what they're going to do moving forward, given the fact that, Griffin's history of being laced with injuries is so epidemic. And you have to wonder, is rolling this particular kind of dice with a guy like him, while they're in the playoffs, watching them getting bludgeoned to death by the Milwaukee Bucks is just, to me, it's almost like a vicious cycle in ineptitude, so to speak, because no matter what they do, if it's trying to do for the greater good, it seems like it feels for the greater bad.
I think Detroit's going to be one of those teams when we get to their autopsy, which will be, I'm sure, pretty soon. We'll really have to dive into the roster construction, the salaries that they've paid out, and whether or not you can build a championship level team, not just a team that scrapes into the playoffs, but a championship level team around the duo Blake Griffin and Andre Drummond. And I think we already know the answer to that. And going back to Griffin's health and the fact or lack thereof for multiple seasons. Again, he's one of those players. He does play hard. He does give it his all, and as a result, suffers a lot of different and varying injuries. And they always seem to come at a very inopportune time for his team. That said, his presence in this series doesn't make one bit of a difference. A lot of people think he's there. Maybe they steal a game. I'm still not on that mindset. But I think this is why, it seems like I've slandered the Pistons a lot, but I just didn't see the point in them making the playoffs. And then having this higher, like I just didn't get it. And not from a theatrical standpoint or whatever the case may be. It would have been nice to see Wade or Kemba even get in. It's just Detroit had literally no chance, especially with Blake being hobbled. So I'm not saying that they should have thrown the game, but it just really is kind of a waste of time now to see the Pistons in here fumbling around and trying to, scrape together to even be competitive, not even win a game, but just to be competitive in that. But Detroit is going to have some hard questions that they'll need to answer, especially with the future of Blake Griffin, but I think more directly with Andre Drummond, who I believe his contract is coming up. So they'll need to figure out exactly what's happening there with that, Reggie Jackson, the whole nine, as Dwayne Casey has entered the fold now and is going to look to try to build a team more in his image.
All right. Well, listen, it's gonna, again, I know we're gonna be salivating to talk about them in the autopsy reports in the weeks ahead. I will say this though. This definitely bolsters Dwayne Casey's case that he probably was the right man for the job because somehow he figured out a way to get these guys to win enough games to find themselves participating in this year's NBA playoffs. So we got a great show ahead of you guys. And once again, we appreciate you and yours for tuning in with us here on the Baseline NBA podcast. As my man Shaw eloquently provides us with his NBA playoff insight, you know where to find him at Shaw Sports NBA. And you know where to get at me at Game Face Lee. You know how to get at the show. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. We're available on all the major platforms. As always, we say, find your favorite platform and download the Baseline NBA podcast. Kick back, relax, and allow us to give you insight on the NBA playoffs and also get your mind right about some of these teams as we put them on the slab and bury them justly. This week in our autopsy report, we're going to talk about the Dallas Mavericks and the Miami Heat, two teams that had legendary players essentially walk away from the game at the end of this regular season. So we'll definitely get into that. As always, we give a shout out to our people from Dash Radio. Be sure to get at us on Tuesday mornings, 9 a.m. Allow us to be your morning ride to get you live for the NBA. The Nothing But Net Radio Network. Catch us Tuesday mornings, 9 a.m. You know how we do. You know how we roll. Let's get them shovels ready. On the breakdown, autopsy report stop. Time to break it down. Time now for the breakdown. Callie Warren Shaw, the Baseline NBA podcast. And you know, it's about that time.
They're dead.
Wait, who's dead?
My team is dead! They knew we were coming, man. They knew we were coming.
They're dead! They're
Shaw
all
knows.
dead!
He's got his Undertaker hat on. I know. I got on that ME jacket. It's autopsy report, man. That's what it is, man. And much like that theme music, we have two legendary players in Dwayne Wade and Dirk Nowitzki who have played and really elevated our era of NBA basketball, our perceptions of what NBA basketball should mean from a domestic scenario and also from an international scenario. And I think it's befitting that we chose to put these two teams together, in our autopsy reports, because given all of the chaos with the NBA playoffs and everything was going on, we really didn't get opportunity to really highlight and discuss the greatness of both of these guys and what they have meant to their respective teams. So we're going to first talk about the Miami Heat. And in a little bit, we'll get our digs into the Dallas Mavericks and talk about their past, present, and future. And the thing that really interests me, Shaw, is given everything that's happened with Dwayne Wade, I have an even more elevated respect for him. I always admired his competitiveness. I've been, me, Shaw. At times, I'm a little salty on D Wade because he caused that severe fracture to Rajon Rondo's arm in the playoffs. I think it was back in 2010. Excuse me, my apologies. It was 2011 when the Celtics had an opportunity to knock off the Miami Heat, and to me, I never really thought about it up until this point. When you play at this kind of level, you take no ish from nobody. And Rajon Rondo was not only good at being a heady player, but he was also a pest. And Dwayne Wade exacted that with playing the way that he knows how to play. That's the reason why we always called him Crash before we called him D Wade. And I just think that it's remarkable that a lot of his demeanor is what helped allow this basketball team to even have a life of discussion in this final run to try and get that 8th seed in the playoffs. If not for D Wade, again, I don't know if whether or not this would have been a basketball team that would have gotten 30 wins this season, given what Eric Spoelstra has had to work with and how this team just inconsistently functions. I think they needed this for them even to be in that conversation to win the amount of games that they won, even though we gave some credence to the idea that this would be an improved basketball team given what they did the previous season.
Let me just say that I think let's give credit to Eric Spoelstra on the Miami Heat organization for the way they handled and monitored Wade and used him as a facilitator this season, and that really I think added life and in some ways longevity to his career in this specific season. The way he was able to be productive, and as you alluded to, really was a spark off the Miami Heat bench. And had it not been for the the greatness that is Lou Williams and even some of the earlier antics of Derrick Rose and things of that nature, Wade and probably still will get some consideration for sixth man of the year. Third and fourth place votes, those types of situations. But he averaged the most amount of points he had since 17-18. Since 16-17 rather. At 15 points per game in 26 minutes a night, and 4 rebounds, 4 assists. I mean, again, very, very solid numbers that you'd want from somebody. And I think this is a guy who struggled with the aging process, but then somewhere along the way figured it out. And he really went out on a high and had one of the most spectacular, I want to say, farewell tours that I've seen in NBA history. I think it's being compared to only thing that was better than this was probably the great Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, whose farewell tour was, second to none. But Wade's better than Kobe's, for sure. I mean, I think only LeBron is going to be able to top that here in the modern era. But what Wade has meant for this Heat organization on the floor cannot be described, and what he's meant off the floor, is completely next level. But to your point, in terms of what he did for them this specific season, in lieu of Whiteside losing his role as he often does every year, starts off good and then kind of, goes into the shitter for whatever reason. The inconsistency with Goran Dragic and his injuries and not being able to stay on the floor. Josh Richardson still finding himself, Justice Winslow still finding himself. Wade was the most consistent basketball player in the Miami Heat organization this entire season.
Now let's keep it 100. When you look at this roster, Shaw, there is no it's like saying D Wade is walking away from the game and he has to put together a will. And when he writes in his will, I leave the keys to the franchise. I leave Wade County 2, and that name is blank, right? I mean, in essence, that's what we're talking about here. I was actually just trying to find some information that I could throw out here. And the first thing I was going to do is bring up, the Miami Heat in the last 5 years, what their record is reflective of, is such a roller coaster. But I think maybe this is probably a better way for me to get my point across about the issue that I have with this Miami Heat team. I'm just going to list to you over the last 5 or 6 seasons, the player who assumes the best win share in respect of the importance to his role on the team for the Miami Heat. This past season, it was Bam Adebayo. Last year, it was Kelly Olynyk. The last 2 years, it was Hassan Whiteside in his heyday, right? When we made all of this hoopla about Hassan Whiteside and being the next future big for the NBA. Previous to that, the year before that was Luol Deng. And then for the last 4 years, it was LeBron James, right? During his stint playing with the Miami Heat. Prior to that, every single year, it was Dwayne Wade. And I think what this is telling me is that it seems like this franchise, and I'm not trying to blame Pat Riley, okay? And I'm not trying to cast aspersions on the Miami Heat. Some organizations know how they need to build a team to be successful. Like, this is their formula, and normally they'll stay true to it. But it just feels like for this team to be playing at an elevated level of what they were accomplishing in the years that they had Dwayne Wade at the height of his play, and when they made those big signings of bringing LeBron James and Chris Bosh on this team, it seems like they need a cornerstone player. It seems like they need someone that they consistently can look at to carry this team to the next level. And that's not what's happened since LeBron James has left this organization. And if this is the formula that Pat Riley is using to build a team, he has got a lot of work ahead of him.
Well, he absolutely has a lot of work to deal with. I think we've talked about this when we've mentioned the Heat previously. And a lot of it is going to depend on where you place the ability and the overall historical value of Chris Bosh. LeBron leaving was supposed to then turn the keys over to Bosh and Wade, kind of simultaneously, so to speak. And then Bosh's blood clot issues really set the franchise back in a way that was impossible for them to recover, given the contract structure and some of the decisions that they made. Now, granted, we've talked at length about Riley's decisions to honor guys like Tyler Johnson and James Johnson and give those guys money just because, well, he knew them, and didn't necessarily want to start over and felt okay, well, they had a good pedigree to help this team be scrappy and try to win. But the Chris Bosh situation past LeBron was really what set this franchise back. Then you doubled down on it with bad decisions with some mediocre NBA players and giving them long-term and escalated contracts. It really is kind of a dual-fold process when it comes to Miami and kind of why they are where they're at right now. But again, I will not excuse, these contracts that were handed out, just ceremoniously because you didn't want to tear down and absolutely rebuild. And now they find themselves in a situation with Hassan Whiteside, $27 million next year that he's opting into, as a player option. There's not a chance he's going to not take that. They got to figure out, once again, do they just play it out or can they find a way to offload him? And with this team, and we've got Goran Dragic, same thing, $19 million owed next year, player option, he's opting in. So those two guys eating up, almost $46 million is insane. And you got to figure out how you can get rid of those guys, if at all, because you don't have the cap flexibility, even with Wade now gone from the roster, and he only made $2 million this past year, how to bring people into the fold, because you can't. You have to, and you don't have enough assets that people are going to want to make a nice deal with you. $129 million is what the Heat owe next year. They're already over the tax.
Yeah.
So
it's overwhelming. And listen, you knew that this was going to catch up with them, right? Like, I think part of it why now it's highlighted even more is because for all of these efforts, it hasn't yielded nearly the amount of success that I think we attribute to Pat Riley and how he runs, his teams. And we have safeguarded Eric Spoelstra for quite some time. And I'm saying this because I'm not trying to, diminish him as a head coach. I think he's a great head coach. I think that he time and time again reminds me of, and I always put him in the comparison, like, I don't know why we don't give him his just due at times. I put him in a comparison of a Doc Rivers. He is a resourceful head coach. And he tries to get as much as he can out of the players that he is provided, to put out on that basketball court. I do begin to wonder, though, because when Eric Spoelstra came into the fold, he didn't come in as an offensive innovator. And we have obviously shifted to where the NBA is more offensive oriented. This team, is allowed the second, in some respects was a good defensive team. And they can hang their hat on the idea that, again, this team can, with the athleticism and everything like that, they can maybe stop teams for a sustained period of time. But to say that Eric Spoelstra is taking some of these players and reinventing them to where their relevancy can highlight the idea that they could be tradable assets, I think is going to do a disservice to Pat Riley, because I don't think that that's the case. It's clear that guys like Goran Dragic, guys like Hassan Whiteside are so one-dimensional that it's almost impossible to move these guys. And unless a specific team is going to give up peanuts for them, they may have to just cut their ties with these guys if their expectation is that they're going to try and move in a different direction.
Yeah, well, they may approach buyouts and that, but I think Mickey Arison, the owner, and Riley, they're probably too proud to do stuff like that. Whiteside,
man, I wish I had TLC.
29 years old.
I wish I had a TLC song to play in the background for you, man. Sorry, just had a moment.
Well, it's jacked because they are too proud, and that's the whole reason they're in the situation that they're in right now. So they'll probably, as I use the term double down, they'll probably triple down now and not buy out guys. Unless Whiteside really comes to Jesus, so to speak, and says, all right, I really want to get out of here. I'm not happy with him being used. Let me forego half of this money and go see what I can get on the open market, which, again, I don't think is a smart business decision for him. He needs to get all this $27 million because his next contract is likely to be pennies based on what he showed. And I think he's a guy who can potentially contribute, but he's just going to have a limited role, and he still doesn't have the right mentality to be where the Heat want him to be, especially at the money that they're paying him. But the rest of the guys, as you alluded to, James Johnson owed $15 million, Waiters owed 12, next year, and that's just next year. And Waiters' contract goes into 2021. Josh Richardson, who they re-upped on and didn't want to trade for Jimmy Butler, he goes into 2022. Bam Adebayo is probably the next face of their franchise. And I go tracing it back to your earlier question. Who does Wade hand the keys off to? And it's shared space. And I think right now it's not necessarily a great place to be. They're good character guys. Like Josh Richardson and Bam Adebayo are great character locker room guys. They learn from Wade, they learn from UD as well. And I think in that regard, in terms of forwarding the Heat culture, sure, but the just talent that is necessary to propel this team, they don't have it. And that's, again, it's not a knock. I think they're very good basketball players, and they're still young enough, especially in the case of Richardson, Winslow, and Adebayo, that they can grow into productive players. But you take a guy like Pascal Siakam or somebody like that in Toronto, and I'd much rather have him than any one of those three. You know what I mean? And that's a lot of it is just, maybe some of the luck of the draw and how you draft or whatever. But I don't think there's a single guy in Miami right now that's ready to take on, being the leader of the team in the way that Wade has done for so many years.
All right, and now that you're talking about draft, I mean, what are we seeing here? Like, if you're the Miami Heat, you clearly you're not gonna have a lot. You're not gonna have complete access to a lottery pick. You'll probably have a respectable pick for this upcoming draft. What are you looking for? I mean, it's so finicky when we talk about this with the NBA, because the idea here is finding a diamond in the rough, right? We often talk about how we get too fixated on the Zion Williamson end of the NBA draft spectrum. But if you're expected to really elevate a franchise's aspirations in this day and age, you got to find your Donovan Mitchells, man. You got to find your Jamal Murrays. And I wonder if the Miami Heat are taking that approach a little bit more seriously, given the fact that they are going to be hampered, by the salaries that they're still owed, and really the personnel that is still lacking. I want to believe that there is a focal point of a position or maybe of a player within those middling rounds that they really are hoping are going to be available to them that might change the dynamic of. I'm not saying he's got to be a franchise changer, but I am saying that he's got to be able to come to the table and do like what they got from Bam Adebayo. They need to replicate that again if we're gonna start seeing some transcendent success now for a team that's been middling around the 40 win totals, for the last 4 seasons prior to this year, which they didn't even eclipse 40. They came out 39 and 43.
I think those are great points, as always, Cal. And when you look at the Miami Heat right now, they're in a situation where they will be in the lottery, currently slated based on record, to have the 13th pick. Obviously, the draft lottery is coming up here in a week or so, or a couple of weeks rather. And we'll see where that actually puts them. I don't know the math. I'm not a draftologist, so to speak. So if they somehow don't end up with that 13th pick, does it then propel them if we see how it unfolds? Do they automatically now jump into the top 5 or something like that? I don't know. I think if they can get maybe into the top 10, that could really put them in a position to be movers and shakers to some degree, because maybe you package that pick with one of these expiring deals, to try to maybe get somebody who's a little bit more willing to produce. But I think you hit the nail on the head, is that if they do keep the pick, and I probably think they should, that they have to get somebody who is ready right now as a rookie to come in here and give them something. And I think this is a team that doesn't excel in any one specific area at all. So they need everything. There's not a player on this team that I don't think can use competition against them in training camp, or can't use, again, just the ability to try to co-develop along the side of. And that's why you feel like, okay, this team is just not in a great position, because you don't really know what they do well. They play good team defense, but that's team defense. I don't think they have defensive stoppers, so to speak. So they need everything. If they get in the 13th pick and there's a great point guard on the board, you draft that. If it's a small forward, shooting guard, whatever it is, you truly use that mantra, we're taking the best player available, because there's nothing that you have that can't be replaced right now. And I don't want to say you probably want to bring somebody along to really kind of be, to grow with him. I don't know that he's going to be a superstar type player, but I think he's right now the guy with the most amount of potential on his team and the right temperament. I think maybe some of the shine is worn off on Josh Richardson a little bit after this year. Say, oh my God, you can't trade this guy. He's only 20 something and, on an affordable deal, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, all right, he was good, but I mean, was he really that dude? So I feel like Miami's in a situation where anything is on the table right now, and whatever they can get in the draft or via trade, they need to be able to look at those situations and options.
Final thoughts about D Wade, Shaw. What would you say is the only regret that you wish had happened with D Wade before him exiting the parquet floor?
I don't think there's any regrets. I mean, I think he's even said that himself. His career has
No.
gone
But I'm asking you, what would be what in if you could think of, like, is there something that you can think of that you can say, damn, I wish D Wade had done this before he left?
I'll be a prisoner of the moment. I think it would have been nice to see him in the playoffs, and I think we started off the show with that. So this year, I think that could have been a true, not necessarily storybook ending, because it wouldn't have ended in a championship or anything like that. But even seeing Kobe hobble off, doing whatever he did in his final game and not even with a shot at the playoffs, I think maybe even playing the last game against Brooklyn, had Miami not already been eliminated the night previous, just having him go for that triple double with a game that meant the most amount of stakes, at least for his team and an organization. And say what you want about him, he is a team first type of guy. I think that would have been something that we could have been a nice little, cherry on top to his career. Seeing him maybe lead that team into the playoffs, and while they would have got railroaded just the same by Milwaukee, just having him in the playoffs, I think would have been, again, like I said, a nice cherry on top. So that's something that I think I regret from his career. But he won championships. I guess he never won the MVP, so maybe that's something you can point to as well too. But D Wade, I think, still had a marvelous and spectacular career.
All right, the Miami Heat finished with a 39-43 record, and once again, there's going to be a lot of questions swirling around, where the Miami Heat goes now that Wade County is under reconstruction down I-95 South. All right, coming up, we're going to get right into our flip side of the Autopsy Report, Callie Warrenshaw Baseline NBA podcast, as we talk Dallas Mavericks. Time to break it down. To the bone gristle. Back again, Callie Warrenshaw, the Baseline NBA podcast, as we continue our discussion of the Autopsy Report. Next body that's on the slab is the Dallas Mavericks, a team that finished last in the Southwest Division with a 33-49 record. But I think the highlight of, the Dallas Mavericks season, while grim and, dismayed in the fact that they, yet again are not participating in a playoff scenario. When we talk about this basketball team, this is all about Dirk Nowitzki, and the era of Dirk Nowitzki as a Dallas Maverick really is probably going to be one of the final. He's going to be one of the last of what we consider as the dying breed of guys who have meant so much to an organization that he never left. He wire to wire, he was a Dallas Maverick. He will go down as one of the greatest international players that has ever played the game of basketball. He'll go down as one of the greatest shooters of the game, even though everybody knows that the current greatest shooter right now is likely Steph Curry. But you can make the argument that you have to put a guy like Dirk Nowitzki in this conversation, given his height, given, the way that he transformed how big men should play the game of basketball. And you got to give kudos to head coaches like Donnie Nelson, owner Mark Cuban, how these guys elevated someone who at the time where international basketball was not being looked at seriously as a way to gauge whether or not a guy like Dirk Nowitzki can be successful in the NBA, right? Post the dream team, that he was one of the ones. He broke through. He made it legitimate for us to talk about how international players can have a long-standing impact and really implement themselves quite nicely in the conversations of the great NBA Hall of Fame players like the Larry Birds, the George Gervins of the world. I don't think that we properly put those international players in that conversation, we can safely put Dirk Nowitzki in the conversation of a lot of those great players. I mean, you can make the argument if you want to talk about one of the 50 greatest players in the game of basketball, you more likely should be putting Dirk Nowitzki in that conversation.
Yeah, 14-time All-Star, 12-time All-NBA, won an MVP, won an Finals MVP, won the NBA championship, obviously. And again, is he, fourth, fifth on the all-time scoring list or whatever? It's just the accolades for Dirk are absolutely astounding. As a player that was kind of a novelty act when he first came in, and nobody really knew what to expect,
Or what to do with this
why
kid.
he was here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and why are you nearly 7 feet tall out here? Shooting jump shots, shooting threes. Like, what is this? And in 1988-99, the NBA had not yet developed the appetite for the stretch 4, stretch 5, none of it. But Dirk, he maintained, and he did it his way. And you have to credit the Dallas organization in a lot of ways for allowing that to be the case. I think there's a lot to be said about that, and allowing your superstar to be that. And it was hard. He definitely had some growing pains, along with some of the coaching and the coaching changes that took place in that organization as well. But he was a consistent, and I think reached the height of his career when they made that first NBA Finals. While it didn't work out for them beating the Miami Heat, that again, and that's why it's so appropriate to have these two teams in our autopsy report here.
And you can make the argument he should have been a 2-time NBA champion. Avery Johnson, and they were shocking a lot of people, because of how well, they ran through in the Western Conference, and they literally should have been the most dominant basketball team, and then they ran into a buzzsaw, which was D Wade, ironically, who we just talked about earlier.
Yeah, and again, I had a lot of interaction these two teams and that specific series. I had actually taken on a humble role as an usher for the AAA arena, just because I wanted to be close to the game, earn some little bit of extra cash, and I was there. And that's one of those things that will always resonate with me. I'll never forget that Game 3 Wade comeback in the second half, just what he did, to even kind of propel his team to eventually take control of that series against Dirk, who at that time was unstoppable. And he's iconic. Dirk is, with that kind of that one-legged fadeaway, it is a logo-ish type of move that you've seen. But Dirk and the Dallas Mavericks have had a long history of success. They have had a couple roller coaster downs here, especially more so recently in recent years. But Dirk has meant a lot to the NBA in a way that I don't know that we can ever fully capture. Just from European side to what he's done, even here across the pond, if you will, whatever it gets to be in a North American border, so to speak. Dirk has just resonated with so many people, and just one of the true good guys of the NBA, both globally and domestically.
And really quick before we get into it's kind of befitting where it's like we're providing a eulogy for Dirk Nowitzki, and we really should be providing a eulogy for the Dallas Mavericks and what they're going to need to do moving forward. But one of the things that when I look back at Dirk Nowitzki, he really challenged the status quo of how we had compared the big men. Because let's keep in mind, he was playing in the era of Tim Duncan, right? And I think a lot of the criticism that was veered towards Dirk is because he wasn't like he wasn't like Mr. Fundamentals. He wasn't like Tim Duncan. I think everybody believed that the pathway to a big success, especially at that time, was the way Tim Duncan was playing the game of basketball. And that simply was not, Dirk Nowitzki. And look, most guys would try to change their game to play in a manner that is, suitable or befitting of what the trend represents. And Dirk stayed true to himself. He carved a niche in the uniqueness of how he was able to play the game. And that uniqueness, I really think, helped elevate the vastness of how the organization needed to put the right players around. We saw, listen, man, their years, the Dallas Mavericks in some respects was one of my favorite teams to watch when they had Steve Nash, Mike Finley, and Dirk Nowitzki on the same team. It was just awesome seeing that type of trifecta. And we don't give credence to the way that Dirk Nowitzki passionately played that game that helped elevate those guys to a level where they had second careers in other places. It gave Steve Nash opportunities to compete for, Western Conference Finals and to try to get to the finals. It gave Mike Finley opportunities to be a key component during the years when the San Antonio Spurs made their runs and eventually won an NBA championship. So I look at how Dirk Nowitzki has influenced other players as well too, and I can see that he challenged the status quo of how we were supposed to perceive the bigs. Because I was one of those guys that thought that he needed to play like a Tim Duncan, and he proved me wrong. And I respect him wholly for that, because now he's just had an historic career that's well deserved.
Right, and a lot of that goes to him, and again, a lot of it does go to the organization for understanding that, all right, we can't box this guy in and make him be what the traditional NBA wants or has seen, over the course of the years. And Dirk changed it, and you can give him credit for he's inspired, I'm sure, a lot of guys to go out there and stretch their game and to be stretch fours and fives, because he was, one of the originators of this ish, if you will, so to speak. And I'm happy for him in that regard, and happy for the fact that he got to spend his entire career in Dallas and will be there in any role, in any capacity, as Mark Cuban alluded to on his retirement night, saying, hey, whatever you want to do, there'll always be a spot here for you. So Dirk retires at age 40, and having a great season, a great send off too in that final game in Dallas, getting 30 points again, just a great way to go out for him, although we didn't get to see him in the playoffs one last time either.
All right, so let's go ahead and focus our attention now to that, what will be left of the Dallas Mavericks after, since Dirk Nowitzki is going to walk away. And, you got to admit, Shaw, we just finished talking about the uncertainty of the Miami Heat with D Wade and Wade County. You know what I'm saying? Like walking away. With Dirk Nowitzki and his, one-legged jump shot walks off the floor. If you're Mark Cuban, you got to feel pretty good about where this team can possibly go. Now that you have a virtual Rookie of the Year, which is really, to me, it's only a matter of time. To me, it's only a matter of time before we start talking about this kid on a bigger level with a guy like Luka Doncic. They make the big trade of getting a guy like Kristaps Porzingis. Now, minus the controversy of the sexual assault and possible rape allegations, if he is cleared of that and his mind is right and he is fully healthy, to have a combination like that moving forward, especially when you look at the dynamic of this Southwest Division, you got to feel really good about the youth movement that could possibly take over for this Dallas Mavericks team and where they can go from here.
Yeah, one thing is puzzling, and I'm going to start off with the rumor that doesn't necessarily have a whole lot of credence to it, but it's puzzling to me that they are supposedly interested in Kemba Walker. And to me, you had Dennis Smith Jr., while Kemba Walker is clearly better, and it's also going to cost you a lot more money than to keep Dennis Smith Jr. I thought part of it was so that you can just go ahead and let Luka be your unadulterated ball handler. Bring Kemba into the fold. If that's what they do, that kind of takes away from that. So that's a rumor that's a little perplexing to me. But on the good side, as you alluded to, they have a great youthful core, solid veteran in Courtney Lee as well too. Tim Hardaway, he's not, I guess he's not young anymore, but he's not old yet. And he's old, roughly $36 million over the next 2 years, player option in 2021. But this team does have the ability now to really kind of put some parts together. They swung and missed for so many years that they were kind of forced into good cap management at this point because nobody wanted to come. Mm-hmm. So getting Porzingis, trading off the contract with Harrison Barnes, getting out from the contract, the guy who they allegedly coveted for as well too, and DeAndre Jordan, has now put them in a good situation to be somewhat useful, and now try to build on a team that could potentially be competitive in the Southwest Division. And I think they're in a good spot for that. And Dirk, as an ambassador for the team, can definitely go out there and help recruit for this organization. And Rick Carlisle is a good coach, and I think he's known he's a good coach. He doesn't take any crap, but he's a good coach. And I think that can get you very far. I don't even mind them taking on the contract of Justin Jackson. At least they have an option on what to do with it after next year. And maybe he can develop into something as well too. But it will be interesting to see what kind of recruiters Doncic, Porzingis, and Nowitzki are going to be for this organization. Again, Nowitzki post-retirement, But can they get some other guys to be convinced here and play in the big state of Texas and on a team that does have a lot of history and want to get back to a level of prominence in the Southwest and in the Western Conference in general?
Well, I'm going to say this. I'm going to agree with you wholeheartedly that I do think it's kind of odd that there are those expressed rumors that the Dallas Mavericks are looking at Kemba Walker. But I'm going to also flip this and say, you know what? That's probably a good thing that there's some of those rumors that are out there. One of the things that I often had talked about with the allure of the Dallas Mavericks is, you know, they didn't have the dynastic level of success as the San Antonio Spurs. And they, as a city, Dallas, while Dallas is more of a football city, right? Um, they didn't have the allure or attractiveness of players like the Houston Rockets used to have, right? So like the Dallas Mavericks sat like right in the middle. And I think that they had to work really hard to be taken seriously amongst those teams. Because I don't think it's like since the 1980s that we took the Dallas Mavericks seriously, like not since damn Roy Tarpley, okay, playing on that basketball team. So my thing is that when I think about this Dallas Mavericks team, if they want to be taken seriously about how they treat, the guys that they draft, so they drafted or so they traded to get a Luka Doncic, they bring a guy like Kristaps Porzingis. If they're going to start moving into the realm again of the free agency conversation, and remember they had that debacle a few years ago with the whole situation with DeAndre Jordan. I feel like it's good that their name is being bantered about, throughout through the halls of conversations, in GM channels about them trying to make a play for players. I don't want that to be that should be their case, but it's good to see that because that is how Mark Cuban made his name. He rolled the dice on getting a couple of key guys around Dirk Nowitzki to put him in position to get him that one championship. And so my mentality is that if you're going to start doing that, do that because you seriously see the quality and the potential that this team can bring you.
Well, I think Cuban is always going to be aggressive. And it's interesting when these rumors come out with Dallas, because I think it goes back to my earlier point. You have to always take it with a grain of salt. They've been interested in a lot of guys, and they struck out a lot. So I don't know what it means that they're interested in Kemba Walker. I mean, definitely doesn't mean that they're going to get him. But it does mean that Cuban is going to be aggressive and try to make sure that Carlisle and company have the best allotment of players that they can convince to be there. And that's what I'm interested to see now. How are these guys now as recruiters? Because Cuban and Carlisle haven't been able to do it, themselves. So now having Porzingis and Doncic, can that young core now convince, maybe a guy in his late 20s, early 30s, who still has a lot to give. So, you know what? Hey, I want to come here on this team and be productive. From a talent perspective, and I'll say this, and I don't think it's going to happen, but from a talent perspective, a Jimmy Butler would be a nice fit for them. Not necessarily from a locker room perspective, but from a talent perspective, that's somebody who, again, I think can fit that role that as basically a 10 times better Wesley Matthews, from what they had. Somebody like that, I think, would be good on their team. I'm not convinced in Kemba only because of the ball dominance, and that takes away from Luka's ability to be able to create as well too. And I think they have a nice young point guard too in Jalen Brunson. Kind of stumbled into the draft, and in the minutes he got this year, he was pretty good. So I like to even see him develop as well. Not say that he's going to be a starter and that needs to play 30 to 35 minutes a night.
But they're going to need a JJ. They're going to need their JJ Barea if they're not going to go and get a guard and they're not going to draft a guard. Jalen, again, I agree with you because I think Jalen Brunson is, he had a great season and he was really key. I watched him play in some games. And he really, he has that it factor in him. He can be a difference maker. And if he's not going to get those minutes that you would want for someone to start basketball games, you're going to rely on him to be your point guard. He's to me like a more rugged Derek Fisher type of guy. And he has better scoring potential, I think, than what Derek Fisher provides. But if you're not going to get that from him, he definitely could be the guy that takes that JJ Barea role over very easily for the Mavericks.
Right, and Barea's a guy they got to figure out whether he's coming back. Suffer that injury. Take him some time. He'd be 35 years old going to next season. So is he somebody they bring back at all, or like I said, you just let Brunson kind of run it out there? Will Harris at 36. Trey Burke, they got acquired in the trade with Porzingis. Is there any interest in bringing him back? Kleber, all these guys are free agents. So they have a lot of options when it comes to their own internal roster of what they want to do. And I feel like those guys are just going to have to wait their turn. And it's not a knock. It's, hey, we have some bigger fish to fry and some big free agents that we'd like to try to bring in. So guys like the Bereas and Trey Burke and even Doran Finney-Smith, all those, they're going to have to wait, I think, when it comes to Dallas in terms of how they try to fill out this roster, because with Porzingis hopefully back and healthy next year alongside Luka, they really want to make a serious run at being a great basketball team and getting back to the NBA playoffs and, being competitive and having a chance to maybe even get out of the first round. I don't think for them just getting the playoffs is what they want to do with that young core. They're trying to make a little bit of noise. I don't think they'll be NBA championship ready next season, but I think they could get to a point where they can at least be a threat in the first round series.
I want to highlight something, and it's more so about the potential depth of this basketball team and the work that Rick Carlisle is going to have to do with these guys. I'm curious on what your take is regarding Kostas Antetokounmpo. They drafted this kid, and I've always listened. I'm not saying that they, the Antetokounmpo brother, like, him and Thanasis, because he's now playing overseas. I'm not saying that these guys are going to be like their brother Giannis, but I think you'd be foolhardy to not really give these type of young guys who have that athleticism factor in them to not see minutes on the basketball court, not find a place for them to contribute for a basketball team. I think that was one of the worst mistakes that the Knicks made. They never developed, and they never really gave Thanasis an opportunity or chance. I think they ruled the day that they didn't have their Antetokounmpo, right? And here you have the Dallas Mavericks, and I'm just wondering, listen, this is how Giannis had to come up with the Milwaukee Bucks. They took a shot in the dark, and now this guy is a virtual MVP. I'm not saying that Kostas isn't, but there's certainly room and opportunity for this kid to elevate himself on the depth chart for this Dallas Mavericks team going into next season.
Well, it's going to sound, snarky, but it's going to take more than Instagram posters of him and his brothers working out in the gym, flexing their muscles. He's got to be able to put the requisite work in. And Dallas, I think, they're giving him a two-way contract, so I'm not sure, but there's a good opportunity for him to potentially play in summer league and really develop himself and see what type of leap he can take to be on the big club and be on the big club on a regular basis for this upcoming season. But it's on him. And I think, again, because his brother is going to be probably the MVP and has a chance at an NBA championship, that gives him even maybe a little bit of equity amongst NBA teams just by virtue of the name. There is something to be said about name value, but there's nobody that thinks that Seth Curry is Steph Curry. So I don't think anybody thinks Kostas is Giannis. But I think Dallas has to have some realistic expectations, but he has to want it himself. And I think the opportunity will come for him if he puts in the work for it.
And listen, you bring up an excellent point. And again, I'm not trying to say that you automatically, but you know what though, Shaw? The Dallas Mavericks had Seth Curry, right? And if not for the leg injury, he was contributing for that basketball team. He was an attributive factor for that basketball team, right? He was a role player for that basketball team. And they chose not to want to keep him. And look at what he's doing for the Portland Trailblazers, right? So I'm just saying that, I know people get caught up in the name factor. What I'm saying is there is a lineage. You look at the Holiday brothers, okay? To me, the Indiana Pacers recognize what this kid can do. I'm not saying that you go in, you put him in there because of his name, but I'm saying that there's something to be said when these guys, you're part of a family of basketball players. And I know what you're questioning is he needs to put the requisite work. This isn't about a social media campaign. But what I'm saying is that often at times, I think they get too fixated at looking at what the superstar brother is doing, and they're expecting him to do that. And I'm just saying that that's not fair to a guy like him when he can do other things to help your basketball team. And the good teams recognize that. They don't look at that name itself. They look at what put them in this position to begin with. If they are athletic, if they've proven that they can play defense, if they can do something, you got to find a way to get these guys to go out there and do things that you're not getting from the other guys, that even if you're giving them contracts, are not giving it to you consistently either.
No, and I don't disagree. It's every player deserves and needs to be evaluated based on his own merit. just whatever work he's done and who he is. Now what his name is, now who his brother or his daddy or his sister was, none of that matters. Is who does that individual represent on the basketball floor and potentially to your team? Does he fit your team culture and your team need at that specific moment in time? And that's something we'll need to find out, with Giannis's brother here, Costas. Like we will see. But at the end of the day, I think that there's not going to be any free rides. And I think he understands that, and I don't think he's looking for it. All interactions or reports that I've seen about him is that he is a hard worker and he does want it. And it is hard when your brother is who your brother is. But he's got to, like I said, he's got to put in that work, and hopefully the Dallas Mavericks or some team in the NBA will give him an opportunity to do that this summer and moving into next season.
All right. So final, assessment, with our autopsy with the Dallas Mavericks, is a team that got 33 wins. What elevates them to possibly 40 wins come next season? What puts them back in the fold of them trying to compete, for spots in playoffs, and having and ushering the Doncic era the same way that we started talking about the Nowitzki era?
They're going to need, I think, solid big man, a true center. And probably whether you feel like that needs to be at the backup position, whether you want to play Porzingis at 5 or you want to play him at 4, whatever the case may be. But they'll need some help on the bench. But again, in 40 wins, I think year 2 of Doncic and a healthy Porzingis is enough to do that. Like I really do, because I believe in the coaching style of Carlisle, when it comes to that. But they're going to need more in order to get into the playoffs and then to be a threat in that first round. And that's where filling out the rest of this roster and this bench. Again, the guards, the wings, and again, obviously in the front court, but especially behind Porzingis. Now, I don't know how convinced I am that he should be getting big minutes on a team. So I think those are some areas that they need to shore up. But I think Porzingis and Doncic alone are enough to get this team to 40 wins with Carlisle's coaching ability.
All right, well, there you have it. The Dallas Mavericks, a basketball team that rolled the dice during the course of the season, made waves by bringing in some players who didn't quite have an opportunity to play due to injuries and recovery. But come next season, we will get a better picture of where this team can elevate themselves. One thing is for certain, the future certainly looks good when you got a guy like Luka Doncic on your basketball team. And I'm sure Rick Carlisle is going to be very excited, distractions and transactions free to be able to work with this guy exclusively to help elevate this team to the next level. This has been a great show. As always, my man Shaw and I giving you the butter goods and discussing the hot button topics, man. I think we got this knack of doing these autopsy reports, man. I think we got a good thing going, man. I hate to say that we need to be burying so many bodies. They're gonna think we're serial killers in this whole thing.
Call the coroner, bro.
My team is dead.
I love doing these. I mean, I think you just get an opportunity to get an in-depth look at these teams, these rosters, how they're constructed, where they've gone wrong, what they've done right. And what are the potential opportunities for improvement as all teams are consistently looking for. It gives us an opportunity to theorize, about potential players that can join their teams in this roster, check out their coaching, their general management, all of it, and really what's going to make that team go to get to the next level. Because they all want to be successful. No one's out here trying to be bad and be bad forever. But sometimes you do need to take a step back, and that's what the autopsy reports allows us to do. So we dig in, man, and it's a great opportunity to do that with you each and every week, man, especially during here in the postseason while we watch the playoff games as well.
Most definitely. So once again, we like to thank you and yours for hopping on board with us this week on the Baseline NBA podcast. For the Baseline, Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. You know we do, and we'll catch up with you next time.